Hey there, welcome to this week's episode of Next Level Play Therapy. And for the last couple of weeks and this week, probably for the next couple of weeks also through the end of October, I'm going to be talking about sand tray therapy. And when I was thinking about topics to discuss in the live stream and podcast, I thought, well, what are the questions that I get asked all the time when I'm doing sand tray trainings? And I have a sand tray training coming up the first week in November here in the United States. It's going to be an in-person training. So I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end if you're interested. One of the questions I get asked all the time in the trainings is it okay to interpret the sand tray to the client? So I thought, well, let's have a conversation about that in the live stream and podcast. So that's what we'll be discussing today. And the other is like, is there the question we all want to know, because we want to make sure that we're providing the best possible approach for our clients, because our goal is to help them get better, right? I feel like most of the people I've spoken to, and this is certainly true for myself, is we get into this profession because we want to make a difference. We want to make a difference in the lives of children and their families. And so when we're thinking about play therapy and how to best help clients, and we're usually thinking, well, what's the best way to help my clients? So we're going to be talking about that, which then kind of also includes the questions that I get all the time about using sand tray therapy and the best way to go about using sand tray therapy in the play therapy process. So let's get started. I would love to know who's here watching live, or those of you watching on the replay for the live stream, the video live stream. If you're listening on the podcast, I would still also love your feedback. Feel free to reach out to me, email. If you're watching the live stream, feel free to post questions. If you're watching the video replay, even if it's months from now, please feel free to comment, ask questions. The only thing that I ask is that you not post specific questions about clients, because this is a public format and we want to make sure to maintain privacy for clients. So feel free to comment, ask your questions, share your information. I would love to know, for those of you listening or those of you watching, are you using sand tray therapy? What approach are you using? Those of you who are probably newer to sand tray therapy probably have different questions than those of you who are maybe a little more experienced using sand tray therapy. I know we're lifelong learners. We're always checking in about the what best ways to go about providing play therapy, new ideas, new ways to think about things, share our knowledge. So feel free to join the conversation. If you find the information helpful, please feel free to share this with your friends across your social media platforms. And let's get started. Today's topic is, what's the best way to use sand tray therapy in play therapy? And some of the questions that I get asked all the time: is it okay to interpret? Is one play therapy model better than another play therapy model? When you're talking about sand tray therapy, what's the best way to provide sand tray therapy? So those are the questions that I want to be able to answer in today's episode. To do that, we really need to go back to the foundation. So really, the answer to these questions lies in your play therapy foundation. Your theoretical model dictates how you apply the model in session after session after session after session. It influences how you make sense of what's going on in the session. This includes in the Santray. Your theoretical model is going to influence the way in which you make sense of what is being represented. So the themes, what's going on in the Santray. Your theoretical model is also going to influence what you say, what you don't say, and how you say it. So, for example, the question of can I interpret what I think is going on in the Santray? Can I interpret that to my client? The answer to that is yes and no. It depends. And it depends on your theoretical model. So, for example, what do I mean by that? I would say from a play therapy's perspective, I'm kind of theoretically, foundationally trained to use child-centered play therapy. You know, along the way, like all of us, we add some more tools to our theoretical toolbox. And so I would say I'm probably more of an integrative play therapist at this point in time. And when I'm working with young children, I am going to use child-centered play therapy. So if I'm using child-centered play therapy and my little client starts using the Santray, then I'm going to continue using child-centered play therapy with my client in the Santray. So what is that going to look like? What that's going to look like is I'll still do my tracking. I'll still use tracking statements. I'm still following. I'm not leading. Anytime I ask a question, I'm going to be leading. That means I've stepped out of child-centered play therapy model. When I'm using child-centered play therapy, I am not going to be interpreting. However, let's say I'm using maybe Adlerian play therapy, or let's say Gestalt play therapy, or one of I call them the new generation integrative models that we're starting to see, which I think is awesome. How I do that is going to be dependent upon what the model says. So, for example, let's say I'm using Adlerian play therapy. At some point during the play therapy change process, and what you're going to be kind of helping your client make connections between the way in which they're going about trying to get some of their needs met and the actual outcomes, which may not be so helpful, of those actions that they're taking. And so one of the things that you can do at some point in time when it's clinically indicated, you'll be kind of helping clients make that connection. So is that interpretation? I would say yes and no. It's the way you go about helping them make the connections. I would lean towards not being interpretive because you're still trying to help them make those connections. But maybe you're using more of a psychodynamic model, and your psychodynamic model has a way in which you can use interpretation. So you would use it that way. In the end, here's what I found to be effective across all models with when I'm not using child-centered play therapy and I'm using more of an integrative, which usually means I'm using more of an Jungian informed with attachment and neuroscience kind of theoretical lenses that I'm looking through. And here was advice that I got when I first got some training. So my Santray training came from a 3-day intensive back in 2003 with Eliana Gill in Fairfax, Virginia. It was a transformational training. It was so good. There are a couple of things that she said that to this day I still incorporate and I pass along in my trainings because I think it is so useful. One of those things is stay in the metaphor. I like staying in the metaphor. So if I'm not using child-centered play therapy and I'm using more of an kind of an integrative approach based on some principles of Jungian sand play and attachment and neuroscience kind of integrated in there, then if I'm using that, now sand play therapy, you're not going to lead and you're not going to interpret. But if I'm using more of an integrative model based on the theoretical models that I've learned, then what I may do is stay in the metaphor and ask questions, which again is leading. So I may ask questions along the lines of, oh, I wonder what this one thinks about what this one is doing. If my client has named it, then I may name it. So let's say bad guy. I wonder what the bad guy thinks about the whatever figure they have in there that seems to be prominent. And then maybe have them do a little dialogue to give voice, because my other kind of, other than the training I got with Eliana Gill years and years and years ago, the other training that I got, which is what I base my trainings on and the way in which I do Santre training, is with Dee Preston Dillon, who is also amazing. She's also on the East Coast, and she would integrate in narrative therapy and kind of teach us how to use some of those techniques, of which I think when you're staying in the metaphor, you can allow the miniatures to have voice, and then that also allows them to work through some of that. So it's not interpretation, and it does allow them to work through some things. And then the theory model is, for many of the theories, which is given the free and protected space, clients will naturally move towards healing and wholeness. And staying in the metaphor gives them enough psychological distance to be able to figure out or kind of move at a pace that they're comfortable with, so that this is where your foundation and your theoretical your theoretical models really do come into play. Your theory model also is going to influence the way in which you make sense of what's going on in the session, and then that's going to influence which direction you may be going in the session. The other thing that you have to think about, and I've kind of alluded to it a little bit, the other thing that you need to think about when you are trying to figure out the answer to the question of, can I interpret? You really need to think about the developmental stage, developmental level, and the age of your client. Are they developmentally able to receive interpretation? Because if we're providing that free and protected space so they can naturally move towards healing and wholeness, it means I'm going to take these things into consideration. And typically, it's been my experience that interpretation sounds a lot more like the teacher telling you, right? The teacher's telling you what to do, not necessarily that they're owning it. And that's really the key, is our client's ability to kind of own what's going on, so the internal shifts can happen. Which brings me to the next thing regarding can I interpret, is being attuned to your clients to know whether or not they're ready to go in that direction. Because sometimes if we move too soon, which we all do sometimes, and I always, to me, there's a good fix for that. Oh, I got that wrong. And then we just move on. You give the power back to the child, and that helps them feel safe again, and they can do what they need to do. If I have kind of misread a cue, or maybe I got a little impatient sometimes and I wanted to facilitate some change. But the thing is, One of the most important aspects of therapy is moving at the pace of the client, not at my pace. And clients need to be able to move through that internal change process in a way that meets their needs, not our needs. And I think a lot of times we as therapists can get a little impatient and impatient is a strong word, but I don't have a better word in this moment to use. Um, and I don't mean impatient in a like negative way, more like, oh, I want to help. I want to help. And sometimes we don't wait on the client to see where they need to go. So those are some things to think about. What I would say is, if you're new to play therapy, if you're new to Santre, what I would say is learn a model. At least get a model under your belt, so that you can apply that model and then start integrating other models and then figuring out what that's going to look like. I would say the vast majority of therapists in the mental health field in general, and play therapy in more specifically, is that most of us end up kind of having an integrative model. And what I would say is, when you're using that integrative model, still think about what your model says, the ones that you've been trained to use. What do they say about how you show up in the session? What do you say? What do you not say? What is your way of being in there? And how are you using those models to make sense of the themes that are going on in the session, and how that change process occurs in each stage of the change process based on the models that you're using. So the next thing I think is important thing to talk about is really something that comes up all the time, especially like I have an online play therapy consultation program, and it's focused on helping child and adolescent therapists learn how to use play therapy and be proficient, be competent, feel confident that they are helping their clients and making a difference in their clients' lives by using play therapy effectively, which includes Santre. And one of the things, we all struggle with in the beginning, and most especially, is there's so many ways of doing it. I hear so much different information about what I should do or what I shouldn't do. I get confused and overwhelmed. I'm not sure what to do. And the reality is so the question is one approach to Santre better than others? And I mean, I would say not really. I remember last year, almost a year ago, I was at the Association for Play Therapy conference in Palm Springs, California. And I think the Play Therapy conference is next week. It's going to be in Atlanta, Georgia. But I remember one of the keynotes was two of the kind of I won't say pioneers, but two of the like influencers, so to speak, in the play therapy arena. And they were having a conversation, and the question of, is one approach better? Because the conversation was, they both had two different theoretical models. And so they were comparing and contrasting their two models, which I thought was brilliant, because it's the question that comes up all the time. And so one of the things that it was D. Ray and, it was another really awesome guy. He's the person that developed ecosystemic. Oh my gosh, his name is escaping me. One of you guys are going to know his name, and feel free to post it in the comments. But anyways, D. Ray made a comment, and I thought, oh my gosh, that is such a good statement, which is Kevin O'Connell. That's what it is. Kevin O'Connor. they were talking about the answer to the question is really picking a model that aligns with your therapeutic values and aligns with what you think is important, and your way of being. This is me paraphrasing what they said. And I would say that's the same for sand tray therapy. I would say the more effective question would be, what model can I learn and start implementing? Because when you learn a model, that's when you're going to and learn how to apply it in all the different stages. Your play therapy model is going to include how you use sand tray. So if you're interested in more of a sand play model, there is the Sand Tray Therapists of America, and they do tons of trainings all the time. I would definitely go check out their website. They have lots of, and it's more of the model developed by Dora Koff several decades ago, like back in the 1950s, using a Jungian framework. So if you're interested in that model, go check that one out. From a play therapy perspective, also think about your play therapy model and how that is applied, including when you're using sand tray using the sand tray in play therapy. So here's why I say this, because I remember that feeling decades ago before I took training. I was introduced to play therapy back in the late 1980s by our school psychologist and school social worker in the special education center where I was a teacher. And our center was an elementary age center. It was elementary school. And we worked with children in special ed who had the classification of emotional disturbance. So these were the kids with the emotional problems that were interfering with their ability to be successful in school. And so that's where I was introduced. I did a play therapy group with the school psychologist. Was kind of a pivotal point in my career when I realized, oh, I want to do this play therapy thing, not teaching. I mean, I like teaching, which is why now I do a lot of teaching, because that teacher in me gets to be come out in play, so to speak. But as far as like overall career, I really realized that I wanted to make a difference in the lives of children by helping them with their mental health issues. But I remember going to graduate school in 1990. I remember graduating from graduate school in 1992 and getting my first job working with children, adolescents, and families in a substance abuse program, which was also, they had mental health focus and substance abuse and crisis intervention. And they had a playroom, but nobody knew how to do play therapy. And we were just kind of told, do your best. It's kids, just play with them. You'll figure it out. But I remember how horrible that felt. I didn't know what I was doing. I desperately wanted training. We didn't have the internet back then where I could find good training. And it took a long time to get good training. And until then, I just kind of muddled through with what I knew and kind of hobbled it together. But I will say, getting specific training and learning how to apply a model with the sand tray and play therapy was really a game changer. One, it helped me be much more effective with my clients. It also helped me recognize change over time. What am I looking at? How am I making sense of this? And so the model that I was trained in did align with my kind of values about the therapy process and my values about how to work with clients, and also theoretically kind of lined up. And when that happened, it made a big difference. Also getting trained to use child-centered play therapy and what that looks like in the playroom and what does that look like when they're using the sand tray made a huge difference. My confidence went up, my effectiveness definitely went up, and my imposter syndrome slowly started to go away as I got more competent in the skills that I was using. So that's what I would say the effectiveness of sand tray therapy, which is and the ability to make a difference in the lives of your clients, really, I would say is influenced heavily by your ability to use a theoretical model. And the reason I say influenced heavily is because still we need that therapeutic use of self. We know that therapeutic relationship is like the glue that holds everything together. So I always say it's a balance between developing competency with your play therapy model and applying that with a variety of different clients over the course of the change process through all the stages of change. That therapeutic relationship is the glue that creates safety and security and helps clients navigate through all of that, all those stages of change. And then I always say the other part of it is that we stay up on research and what's going on and always be lifelong learners um, when we're working with our clients. So that is it for today. Let me just do a quick little recap. One, if you're trying to figure out if it's okay to use interpretation when you're providing sand tray therapy with your clients, you really need to consider what your theoretical model says about the use of sand tray. And your theoretical model is going to dictate what you say it, how you make sense of what clients are doing in the play therapy process, where they are in the stage of change. It's also going to answer the question of can you interpret or because ultimately the question of interpretation comes down to how do I help my clients make the connection about what is going on with them that's creating barriers for them to feel successful, have that resiliency, and feel better in their lives and navigate the ups and downs of life. So, your theoretical model is going to influence how you help them make those connections, or whether you're just 100% of the time following and you're not doing any leading. This includes also when you're integrating a variety of theoretical models. And if you've done that, then you've kind of created a little bit of an integrative framework for yourself, but it's still based on those theoretical models that you've learned. So you're going to be thinking about those things when you're trying to figure out how to help your client through that change process so that they can have those breakthroughs that they are coming to you for and that you want to help them make. So the second thing is one approach to sand tray better than others? And I believe the answer to that is no. I believe the answer really is, or the question is, oh no, I think answer. The answer to that question is what theory models have you been trained in? Two, which ones align with your values about therapy and the change process and how you work with clients? And then use that. It's going to be based on a theoretical model though, so you want to make sure that you're applying those models. And you also want to think about the age of your clients and the needs of your clients and which models work best with those. Do I think, most of us at this point in time are kind of, you've been in a therapy process. You are a little more integrative. But then I would also say that there are some theory models that are a lot more diverse and can support a wide variety of issues, and then you can kind of integrate in. I always like integrating in neuroscience and attachment. I feel like those theory models can be applied to, I mean, that those theoretical lenses, attachment and neuroscience, can be applied to a wide variety of theoretical approaches, including play therapy. So I tend to see everything through a neuroscience and attachment lens. So that is it for today. If you're interested in learning a play therapy model to use Santray with your clients, and maybe you love using a neuroscience and attachment lens like me, I do have a 2-day in-person Santray training coming up the first weekend in November in 2024. And that is called Using a Neuroscience and Attachment Lens with Santray in Play Therapy. So I keep the Santray trainings really small. I make sure they're in person. I like doing in-person Santray trainings because I really am a huge fan of you getting your hands in the sand and moving that sand around, creating Santray world, so to speak, and then using that opportunity to learn and process and hold as a group. We'll go through the Santrays and use those as kind of a lot of practical hands-on experience, identifying themes, understanding themes. What do you do with that information? How do you hold the Santray process through all the stages of change? And in this particular training, I'm really going to focus on using a neuroscience and attachment lens through that process. So it's 2 days. If you are interested or you want more information, then pop over to my website and click on the courses page, and then look for the training that's called Using a Neuroscience and Attachment Lens with Santray in Play Therapy. I have some other courses on there if you're interested, more on demand, and you can take them in your time zone when it's appropriate, when it's convenient for you to learn some other things. The Santray training, when I do those, they're in person. And so the next one that I have coming up is Using a Neuroscience and Attachment Lens with Santray in Play Therapy, November 2nd and 3rd in Southern Utah. It's beautiful that time of year too. So if you're interested, pop over to my website at rhplaytherapytraining.com/courses. That's renewingheartsplaytherapytraining.com, Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training, and then click on the courses page. So that is it for today, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.